Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Miracle Mindedness, my little corner of YouTube. As you all know, I am moving through the text of the COA version of A Course in Miracles. And without any further delay, I am going to get right into reading that text. Today we are on Chapter 3, which is called Sane Perception, and Section 5, which is called Perception versus Knowledge. Perception versus knowledge. You are confused about the difference between perception and knowledge. You will note that we have said very little about knowledge as yet. One of the exceptions is in the correction for formula for fear, which begins with know first. And I'm not going to open that footnote, but what it says is essentially know first that this is fear, which means in the present moment, being in touch enough with your emotional state to recognize that you are in the state of fear is the first and most essential step in correcting fear. You have to acknowledge that this is fear. The reason is because you must get your perception straightened out before you can know anything. To know is to be certain. Uncertainty merely means that you don't know. Knowledge is power because it is certain, and certainty is strength. And I am going to read this footnote. Knowledge is power comes from the Latin maxim scientia potentia est, usually attributed to Francis Bacon. Its usual meaning is that having information grants one power to control one's world. Here it means the direct awareness of true reality results in certainty, a state of psychological strength. Perception is temporary. It is an attribute of the space-time belief and is therefore subject to fear or love. Misperception produces fear, and true perception induces love. Neither produces certainty because all perception varies. That is why it is not knowledge. True perception is the basis for knowledge, but knowing is the affirmation of truth. So I want to clarify a few things here because it's really important to understand that perception and thoughts are intertwined, inherently intertwined with each other. Because what we're doing, this is basically the first 10 lessons or 12 lessons of the workbook, is we are perceiving the meaning of what we see. We are either creating the meaning if we are in a state of love, or we are making meaning, which is false, if we're in a state of fear. And we are interpreting what we see based on the meaning that we have given it. And that kind of circles back to why you need to be sensitive to your emotional state while you're seeing something and attributing meaning to it, because the state that you're in is the litmus test for whether or not you are creating with these thoughts. Perception through thinking is either making or creating a world, an experience, and the litmus test as to whether you're making or creating is whether or not you are in a state of fear or a state of love, which are variable because we're variable in our emotional states. But this course is teaching us to be more and more consistently in the state of love, which is the state of knowledge. Paragraph 3. All of your difficulties ultimately stem from the fact that you do not recognize or know yourself, your brother, or God. Recognize means know again. And the footnote just explains the Latin, which is essentially that recognize does mean know again. It doesn't mean see again. And that's very important because it's beyond perception. It has nothing to do with the body or appearances or anything. Knowing with certainty, you can only know the truth with certainty, right? Because obviously, if you think you know something that's not true, essentially true, then you're wrong. So therefore, you couldn't possibly be certain about something that you're perceiving wrongly. This means you knew before. Note that it does not mean saw before. You can see in many ways because perception involves different interpretations, and this means it is not whole. The miracle is a way of perceiving, not a way of knowing. It is the right answer to a question, but you do not ask questions at all when you know. Kind of wanted to just briefly mention because the science is, I think the science supports the spirituality nowadays. I wanted to kind of circle back to the thing about perception is temporary. It is an attribute of the space-time belief. So this is the idea that there is a fundamental, as in un undeniable truth of reality outside of us that we call the world of space and time. And even back to Einstein, there's been a real understanding in the quantum physics world that space and time are completely leaning on each other, as in you can't really experience space without time, and you really can't experience time without a belief in that space. In other words, in the belief that there is a world external to you that you see with your eyes. And now, in the same seat as Einstein sat in at Princeton, there's this brilliant theoretical physicist named Nima Arkani-Hamed. You can look him up on YouTube. He's got this lecture series that he gave proving that space and time are doomed. That's kind of the crux of his argument that he has established mathematically. Is that space and time are not fundamental. He doesn't necessarily go into what is fundamental, which is consciousness, but Donald Hoffman, the cognitive scientist, who is the person who introduced me to Nima Arkani-Hamed, does acknowledge that consciousness is fundamental and space and time are a projection from consciousness. You could try to watch Nima Arkani-Hamed's lectures, especially if you're pretty astute in your mathematical knowledge. For me, I'm not really very good at math, so most of what he said just went right over my head. And I've always leaned on Donald Hoffman for all this stuff because he's got a very good skill of just saying it in plain English. He'll get into the weeds about the scientific theory around it, but he also just says it plainly, which I think is a breath of fresh air. Because if you watch any like two quantum physicists get together, especially like the string theorists and stuff, and talk about their theories of everything and stuff, they're usually saying stuff that is so above our heads that it's hard to ingest. It's hard to integrate into true learning. But Donald Hoffman's great at saying what it actually means. Okay, back to the lesson, or back to the section. Paragraph 4. Questioning delusions is the first step in undoing them. The miracle, or the right answer, corrects them. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious. They are subject to transitory states, and this implies variability by definition. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and action must occur in time. So this gets back to, again, we want to take accountability for our perceptions because that is the root of our behavior. Okay, our behavior, which is body-based, our behavior is always body-based. It's what the body is doing, and it is always dependent on how we perceive things. Okay, so we can perceive things wrongly, which means we're in a state of fear and therefore behave wrongly. I always use the garden hose being mistaken for a snake. You're perceiving that garden hose incorrectly, and therefore your behavior, which is to leap back in fear, is a mistake itself, but the root of the mistake was the misperception. And that's the crux of our issue, is that we just trust our eyes and ears too much, far, far too much. Okay. Line 6 of paragraph 4. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. You know when you have ceased to ask questions. The questioning mind, in quotes, perceives itself in time and therefore looks for future answers. The unquestioning mind, also in quotes, is closed merely because it believes that the future and the present will be the same. So this is not the unquestioning mind that's kind of referred to in the sentence, knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. This is more like the put our heads in the sand and don't ask any questions because we just want to believe that the future is going to be like the present. This establishes an unchanged state or stasis. This is usually an attempt to counteract an underlying fear that the future will be worse than the present, and this fear inhibits the tendency to question at all. Whew, I really resonate with that. Visions are the natural perception of the spiritual eye, but they are still corrections. The spiritual eye is symbolic and therefore not a device for knowing. It is, however, a means of right perception, which brings it into the proper domain of the miracle, but not of revelation. So revelation is of knowing, but also revelation can be very, very temporary. Lots of people have insights or aha moments that we would call revelations, where they are truly seeing the awesomeness of the world that is really there and the love that is really here. But then they slip back into fear. He's going to say something in the next paragraph that kind of attests to that. The fact that perception is involved at all removes the experience from the realm of knowledge. That is why these visions do not last. Note that the term insight, in quotes, though referring to lofty perception, is not an attribute of knowledge. I am going to read this footnote. Insight refers to seeing deeply into something. It thus belongs to the realm of perception, not knowledge. This is why terms like lofty are meaningless in this context. Insight is not the way to knowledge, but it is a prerequisite for knowledge. Being of God, knowledge has nothing to do with your perceptions at all. That is why it can only be a gift of God to you. An ancient proverb instructs you to know thyself, or be certain. This footnote just gets at where that really comes from, because a lot of people think that quote's in the Bible. But that quote goes back to the Greeks and is in the library at Delphi. It's like written in the stone. It's engraved in the stone above the library at Delphi. The quote, "The truth will set you free," which is another kind of parallel quote, that is from the Bible. That is something that Jesus said, and it's absolutely true. Certainty is always of God. When you love someone, you have perceived him as he is, and this makes it possible for you to know him. But it is not until you recognize him that you know him. Only then are you able to stop asking questions about him. While you ask questions about God, you are clearly implying that you do not know him. Certainty does not require action. When you say you are acting on the basis of sure knowledge, you are really confusing perception and knowledge. Knowledge brings mental strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. So yeah, it's so common, it's such a common refrain to base our knowledge on perception. Like the classic refrain is, I saw it with my own eyes. Well, your perceptions are variable. And so you are not even conscious of the meaning you're giving to what you saw. And that is what's basically making it variable, because if you saw it on a different day when you were in a state of love as opposed to a state of fear, it would look entirely different. Okay, paragraph 9. Perception, miracles, and doing are closely related. Knowledge is a result of revelation and induces only thought. Perception involves the body, even in its most spiritualized form. Knowledge comes from the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. The altar within refers to the mind that is one with God or the Holy Spirit. Okay, so each one of us had an implant. And this was at the moment when we decided, or we asked ourselves the question, what would it be like to be separate from everything? And then this dream unfolded like a carpet of time and space so that we could experience what it's like to be separate. But the Holy Spirit was God's one and only intervention in this world, which was this implant of a right mind that knows the truth, that recognizes the truth about each other and sees each other for who we really are. And it is in all of us. I think it was the last section that I read where he said, there is nobody who's ever existed in this world who hasn't had some experience of the truth, because that implant is in all of us. And that's the real us. And so he's often making statements about us that we will not resonate with us because the ego is the one who's reading the passage. And he is just restating the truth about us all the time when he makes these bold statements. To perceive the truth is not the same as knowing it. This is why students may have so much trouble with integrating this course. The tentative perception of some is too uncertain for knowledge because knowledge is sure. The perception of others is so variable that they swing from sudden but real knowledge to complete cognitive disorganization. This is what I was referring to a little while ago. And the footnote is kind of necessary to read here. Cognitive disorganization refers to distractibility, difficulty in concentrating, and a tendency for thoughts to become derailed and tangential. This disorganized thought shows up in disorganized speech. The reference to two types of people here, those who are too uncertain for knowledge and those who swing from genuine knowledge to cognitive disorganization, originally referred to Bill and Helen, the co-scribes of the course, respectively. Bill was the first. He was uncertain of who he was and uncertain of his own worth, and that was kind of his barrier to truth. And Helen, on the other hand, already had had a handful, at least, of mystical experiences that one would call revelations and true perception. But she also swung wildly back because I think she was clinging to what is quoted in her biography as her militant atheism. All right, paragraph 10. If you attack another's error, you will hurt yourself. You do not recognize him when you attack. Attack is always made on a stranger. You are making him a stranger by misperceiving him so that you cannot know him. It is because you have made him into a stranger that you are afraid of him? What is he to you? He is your brother. What else do you need to know? But do know that this is not a matter of perception, but of fact. Perceive him correctly so that you can know him. The prayer for the miracle is, Jesus, help me see my brother, name, as he really is, and thus release both him and me. Anytime there is anything unloving that crosses your mind, and I'll read the footnote on this one, Helen originally inserted the parenthetical remark at this point regarding sex, possession, etc., and this referred to inappropriate sexual attraction and most likely desire to possess another sexually, in addition to anything else unloving that crosses your mind. Anytime there is anything unloving that crosses your mind, you should immediately recognize that you do not want to hurt your brother. Right perception is necessary before God can communicate directly to his own altars, or to our minds, and to our Holy Spirit, which he has established in his sons. There he can communicate his certainty, and his knowledge will bring the peace without question. God is not a stranger to his own sons, and his sons are not strangers to each other. Knowledge preceded both perception and time, and will also ultimately replace or correct for them. And this is the real meaning of the biblical account of God as Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I do like to read the footnotes that refer to the Bible. Revelation 21:6, and he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The Course's usage of this means that God's knowledge of his sons was there in the beginning, before time, and will be there after time is done. It also explains the quotation, before Abraham was, I am. And that's from John 8:58. Jesus said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Here, this seems to mean before time was, knowledge is. Again, the eternity of heaven is always eternity. That's just the fact about heaven, which is where we truly reside, beyond this state of perception that we are in, what we call the world of space and time. And that state exists before there was time, and it will exist after time is over, and it exists now as we are deluding ourselves in this time and space delusion. Such a beautiful quote because really gets at the eternity of the present moment, like present moment awareness, which we're striving to be in at all times consistently, is the key to really understanding what eternity is. We're never in the future, and we're never in the past, but that doesn't mean we can't be unaware that we're never in the future and never in the past, because frankly, most of our thoughts are directed towards the future or the past, or they are in reference to the future or the past. Perception can and must be stabilized, but knowledge is stable. Fear God and keep his commandments is a real scribal error. And that error was written in Ecclesiastes. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It should read, know God and accept his certainty. This error is why the commandments are almost all negative, in contrast to my statement, thou shalt love. And that statement was delivered in Mark 12:29 through 31. And Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all my soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Jesus's point about the Ten Commandments seems to be that they're largely negative quality, in that they are mostly prohibitions against certain behaviors, comes from the error of viewing God as fearful. And that was totally the Catholic Church, I think St. Peter, who really distorted Jesus's teachings, certainly, and basically introduced, well, no, there was already, I think, the concept of fearing God in the world before, probably. But Jesus's statement or his commandment that thou shalt love is clearly not a fear-based commandment, because it's moving towards rather than away from something, right? All the other commandments are thou shalt not do something, or you face the wrath of God, essentially. Okay, paragraph 12. There are no strangers in God's creation. To create as he created, you can create only what you know and accept as yours. So just to remind you, the discernment between creating and making, anytime he's using the word create, it is because you're in a state of love. That's from where you create. If you're in a state of fear, then you're making up things. You're making up a fictional account of this world. And now we're all seeing that. He created them by knowing them. He recognized them. He recognizes them perfectly. When they do not recognize each other, they do not recognize him. Brothers can misperceive one another, but they rarely maintain that they do not know each other. And that's another statement right there of like what's true about us. In other words, the Holy Spirit within all of us recognizes all of us, and we see our brother as ourself rather than as someone different than us. And that's, yeah, just a classic example of Jesus's boldness in making statements that basically deny this thing that we call reality, which is this world of separation. This is possible only if they maintain that they are not really brothers. Okay, so another brick in the foundation of A Course in Miracles. There's a lot of just terms that need to be understood what they mean before he goes on and teaches following lessons. So I hope that that was helpful for all of you, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day full of blessings and miracles. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.